Hello, everyone, and welcome to our studio. Welcome, Nathan Elberg from Montreal, author and working on your PhD right now on a very, very interesting subject. That's what I think. So, how are you, Nathan, and welcome to our show.
God, I'm well, and it's a pleasure to be here.
And how are you doing in Montreal? We're here in Toronto.
We're doing pretty much the same. My daughter lives in Toronto, so I get constant updates as to what's going on there.
Awesome. The reason that I guess you're on our show today because the subject that you are researching and working on your PhD and writing a book that we'll get into is very interesting. Between the indigenous, I guess, Native American and the Jewish indigenous to the land of Israel.
Let me just jump in with a correction there.
Sorry, did I get it correctly?
No. The PhD that I'm doing is separate from my work on the Native Americans and Jews. The PhD that I'm working on is on the culture of modern Orthodox Jews. Anthropology studies. So that's a separate box.
That's a show on its own.
Yeah. The subject of Native Americans and Jews is something that's been on my mind for many, many years. When I graduated university with my undergraduate degree, one of my professors hired me to go work on a research project to help defend some American Indians whose land was going to be flooded by the government. This was the James Bay Project. And we're going back a long time here. And my job was to prove that the Indians depended on the land, on hunting and fishing in order to survive. That was their livelihood, that was their life. So I started work, I went up and I spent some time up there in a couple of Native American communities. And I really enjoyed that, and it was really productive work. The Indians got the court injunction that they needed. And I was looking for more, and I kept on going back up north to mostly the same Indian community for various research projects. That included spending a winter in the forest, hundreds of miles from the nearest town. In midwinter. 40 below zero was the average temperature, with no electricity, no plumbing, no telephones or anything like that, living in a teepee. And we lived by hunting and fishing. I liked that. I might be crazy, but I liked it.
No, different.
It was an experience that will always stay with me.
Yeah.
After that, I went to graduate school in New York, and I decided to try something different. And I went up to an Eskimo village after that, a small Eskimo village of a few hundred people. And I was doing a study of the culture of younger people in that Eskimo village. Those younger people, and by younger, I define it as what the age I was at the time, which was in my 30s, early 30s. When I would ask them to tell me stories, tell me about their way of life, they said, "Why are you speaking to us? Everybody who comes to the village and wants to know about Eskimos speaks to the old people." I said, "I want to find out what life is like for you now." They said something very perceptive. They said, "We're not real Eskimos." "What do you mean?" "We're only 5-year-old as Eskimos." "Why?" Because they said, because when we were 5 years old, we were taken from our culture and put in the white man's school, and we learned the white man's culture rather than our own. So we don't live like our parents did or like our grandparents did. So I said, that's foolish. I don't live like my grandfather did, but I'm just as Jewish as he was. I thought about that for many months and concluded they were right, I was wrong. And at that point, I became interested in seeing the shared issues between Native Americans and Jews.
Wow. Because you're talking about the indigenous people in the US right now, right? Because
No, I'm talking about indigenous people in Canada.
because in Canada, the residential school, the last residential school just closed in 1996. It blows your mind. But I mean, it was generations that, they took their culture away. So, oh, wow. Okay.
It wasn't always residential schools out of town. Sometimes it was schools in the community.
Of course.
And I heard personally many of the stories
Mhm.
from Native Americans in the residential schools. I had one friend who was my guide really in that Indian community and my translator.
Mhm.
He told me that once in school, a teacher heard him talking in his own language in Cree with a friend.
That wasn't allowed.
And the teacher took a heavy stick and whacked my friend on the back, causing permanent damage.
Of course.
Now, when someone told my friend, you were entitled to compensation for that. You could get $10,000 in compensation if you apply for that injury. My friend, who was an adult by then, was puzzled. He said, what would I do with $10,000? Why would I want $10,000? This was someone who was so poor he didn't own a telephone, certainly didn't have a bank account, couldn't afford bullets for his gun, but he was puzzled. What do I want $10,000 for? And he didn't bother applying for it. Very different attitude.
Yeah. Different, I guess, value for life, different value for way of life.
Another friend of mine, when I was working for an Eskimo association, told me that the missionary who ran the residential school where he was had a sister who always made the teenage boys line up after their showers before getting dressed so she could inspect them.
I know.
There are lots of stories that are worse than that.
Oh yes, I know. I did a lot of research about indigenous people in Canada and horrible stories, horrifying what the Canadian government did to those people. Yeah, I know. But let's continue and tell me about your connection to the Jewish people.
My connection to the Jewish people, well,
the connection that you found between indigenous people and the Jewish people.
Okay. I had some interesting experiences with Native Americans talking about Jews when I was up there.
Mm-hmm.
One Eskimo woman said to me, "Oh, you're so lucky. You're going straight to heaven. You don't have a problem because you're Jewish."
I've never heard that before. Okay.
I was pleased to learn that. For most of them, it was a non-issue.
Really?
One person who was actually a friend when he was drunk one day went on a long anti-Semitic rant and apologized for it the next day. I started to think about the connections between Jews and Indians in terms of the situation that they were in. The Jews had a piece of land that they were attached to, that they had been attached to for many years, and they had lost
years. Yeah, thousands and thousands of years.
The Native Americans had many lands that, although they weren't necessarily thrown off of them or exiled from them in all situations, they had lost control of them and were just isolated on small little sections.
Yeah.
I have to note that many of the Native American tribes are not in the same location that they were when contact was first made. They were expelled or moved to other areas, or they moved on their own to other areas. But there's always a longing to get back to your own homeland, to get back to the land that you're from. So when I was working with the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, which is a Montreal-based think tank with activity in Toronto as well, I should mention. I discussed the idea with the director of doing some research on what's the relation between the situation of Native Americans and of Jews. And we found that there were quite a few parallels, quite a few common interests and shared experiences. We also found that there were many attempts to co-opt the Native American experience into the Palestinian story, using intersectionality to align the interests of the so-called Palestinians with Native Americans. In fact, I have some Ojibwa friends from Wisconsin who tell me that Muslims and Palestinians are marrying into the tribes and trying to claim Native American status and to take over the tribes, to get into positions of leadership in the tribes. And this is something that's being resisted. But we went looking for people who were knowledgeable in the field, people who had expertise in the field, who could make a contribution to a book that we decided to publish on this subject. And we have contributions by academics, by Native Americans, by Native American academics.
Yes.
All very well-informed, and we have also a rabbi in there, I should mention, all very well-informed and presenting unique perspectives. We have a couple of Native American Jews. Mara Cohn is a Sioux Indian who lives in Seattle. We have Scott Ben Levy, a Shawnee Indian who made Aliyah about 10 years ago.
Now that's an interesting story. How does the Native American, decide to, I guess, to be a Jew and make Aliyah to Israel? This is fascinating.
Well, Scott, or his Shawnee name, which translates as walking knife, grew up knowing of his ancestry. He had both Jewish and Indian ancestry. And he decided that he belonged in Israel.
Okay.
Mara Cohn's story is quite fascinating. She grew up in Seattle. Her mother was from the reservation in the Dakotas, from a Sioux Indian reservation. She moved to Seattle and she noticed that a lot of people disliked Jews, and she became curious about it. She started looking into why people dislike Jews.
She decided, did she find the answer? I'm still looking for it.
But what happened was it drew her in, and she started studying Judaism, and she decided to convert.
Wow.
And while she was undergoing the conversion process, her cousin back at the reservation sent her a scrap of a document that had belonged to her mother's mother's mother. And she showed it to the rabbi who was doing the conversion, and he said it was a ketubah.
Wow.
So Mara's great-great-great-great-grandmother actually had been riding west in a wagon train.
Wow.
And the wagon train was attacked, and the girl was taken as a prisoner, or the woman was taken as a prisoner and adopted into the tribe. This was the result of the American army had wiped out so much of the tribe in just ruthless raids, going and slaughtering whole villages, that they were short of people. So they decided they would get more people for the tribe. Rather than slaughtering the people who attacked them, they took people and made them family, made them part of the tribe. So Mara is Sioux Indian nobility and a full-fledged Jew.
Wow.
And a military veteran. So it's quite a story. And she writes beautifully about it.
We should tell the viewer that actually what we're talking about is like, it's a book of different research, different stories.
It's mostly, I'll show the book, it's mostly different articles by the academics, by the Indians. I'll read you the table of contents, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
So first we have an article, Aboriginal Rights of the Jewish People, by Alan Hertz, who is a former senior advisor to the Privy Council of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We have an article by Sally Zerker entitled Israeli Occupation, The Big Lie. Sally is a professor emeritus in Toronto, an economic historian. Mara Cohn, as I mentioned, What It Means to Be an Oglala Sioux Jewish Woman, a personal account.
Wow.
Then there's an article by me, Simple Truths. A Cree Indian explains a 2,000-year-old rabbinic teaching. Ira Robinson is a professor in the Department of Religion at Concordia University. He writes about the David Hennike affair and the problem of using the Canadian justice system in the fight against anti-Semitism. David Hennike was an Indian leader who was given the Order of Canada for the work he did on behalf of Native Americans and of Indians in Canada, but he was also an Army veteran who was greatly influenced. When he was stationed in Germany, he was influenced by Nazis, and when he was stationed in Gaza on a peacekeeping operation, he was influenced by the people he dealt with there, by the Palestinians he dealt with there.
Can we just stop for a second? I just want to go back and what can you tell me a little bit about why you think the Jews are the indigenous people on the land of Israel?
Okay, let's distinguish between indigenous and aboriginal.
Okay.
This is coming from the article from Alan Hertz.
Okay.
That an indigenous people is a people who were formed in the land. So they came into an existence as a people in a place. Aboriginal means they were the first to do so.
Okay.
So while there were tiny tribes and scattered hill peoples in what's now Israel, when the Jewish people came in, it's where the Jewish people became a nation, and they were the first to do so in that territory. The Native Americans became peoples in the lands that they were the Aboriginal people there, they were the original people there. Indigenous means someone who became a nation afterwards. So one might be able to make an argument that people some group of people who became a people in the land afterwards could be indigenous to the place, but they could not be Aboriginal.
Okay.
So there's a distinction there. So the Jewish people became a people in the land of Israel. That's before, when they arrived from Egypt, there was still conflict, there was still tribal fighting, but they came as one, and they became a coherent people, especially once a king was given and the tribes were united under Saul and David.
Okay. Okay. But there's okay. So that's what. But there's people that say this is not. That's not true. This is not our land. We don't belong to the land. To Israel. This land doesn't belong to the Jews.
Well, we never gave up our claim. There's tons of evidence, mountains of evidence, archaeological evidence, and so on, that the Jewish people were there prior, and they were there at the time they were there. We have the first title deed in recorded history, which is the Tanakh, the Bible, where Abraham buys the land in Hebron to bury his wife. It's documenting that acquisition and documents our presence. In all our prayers, in all our holy books, we maintain the claim, we maintain the tie to Israel. It's never something that we've forgotten. If you even go back to the beginning, to earlier parts of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire used to promote tourism in Jerusalem, saying, come see the site of the Temple of the Jews. They weren't denying it then also. They accepted it.
So why would you say that, today's day, we're like, everywhere we turn, there's people are saying that, we're occupying a land that doesn't belong to us. We hear it everywhere. How do we
hear it everywhere? And it's by people who really don't know, firstly, what an occupation is.
That's for sure.
And don't know the history of the land. If you hear a lie, you hear someone telling a lie, no matter how preposterous, there could be a couple of reasons for accepting it. The first reason would be you're afraid that it might be true, or you really want it to be true. And lots of people, even though they might not be overtly anti-Semitic, will accept the lies because back in their mind, in their tradition, in their ancestry, there's an anti-Semitic tradition, a Jew-hating tradition, and this confirms it. And people accept the most preposterous statements. We hear them coming out more and more now in the United States.
In Canada.
Canada as well. But we're hearing it especially from the rioters and demonstrators and from the people aligning themselves with them, from the intersectionality. And we're hearing it also, unfortunately, from Jews who don't have much of Jewish knowledge, but are high-profile Jews, let's say actors like Seth Rogen, making claims.
Your book the book is named Zionism?
Zionism, an Indigenous Struggle.
Okay.
And the subtitle is Aboriginal Americans and the Jewish State.
Why did you use Zionism? Just curious, because I know, growing up, for me, Zionism was, wow, it's something to be proud of. I'm still in. But somehow the narrative is like somebody's trying to change the narrative and make Zionism into a bad thing.
Zionism is the tie of the Jewish people to their homeland.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the tie of the connection between Jewish people and their homeland and its relation to the claim of Native Americans and their homeland. So it's two parallel struggles, and there's a lot of shared interest and a lot of shared history, which is why we have so many highly intelligent and knowledgeable Native Americans who are interested in our project. I should mention before I forget that there are excerpts from the book online. The website is, the CIJR website is isranet.org.
I will put it on the screen, don't worry. It will be on the screen. so everybody can
people can read some of the articles that are there.
They're very fascinating, very different, very controversial, some of them. You know which one I'm
It wouldn't be a good book if they weren't.
uh, Tell me about the author that wrote Palestinian is a Myth, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure exactly of the name. I don't have the book in front of me. But
well, there's one by David Yeagley, which is There Is No Palestine, There Are No Palestinians.
who, like, tell me about him. Like, I mean, I guess he researched what he's writing.
David Yeagley, or Dr. David Yeagley, was a Comanche Indian, extremely conservative. Some people tried to claim that he wasn't a real Indian and to get him thrown out of the tribe. He's dead now. He had a PhD in music and was really a Renaissance man. He was a scholar on Jewish history and Jewish culture. He even posted Torah Shiurim on YouTube. I once had a question about something I'd read in Tanakh, and I mentioned it to him, and he immediately had a very interesting answer to it.
Wow.
So he was really knowledgeable. So he goes into the history of the people who claim to be Palestinians in the early 20th century, shows how they came into the land at that time, not for any purposes of allegiance or historical connection, but for economic and related purposes. And he shows that they have no claim to the land, and it's all a distortion, and it's all a fraud.
You know, I have to tell you this. I found, I was looking amongst my parents' documents the other day. Actually, it was about 2 months ago. We had time with COVID, to go through everything, and I found my grandfather's. I can't remember. It was like I'm trying to think. It's like a book. I don't know if it was like we have like OHIP or some kind of book. I guess in Israel they had to carry health cards, and it's like a little book. And when I opened it, it says there it was both in Hebrew and in English. And in English it said that he was born, because my grandparents were born in Israel. It says he was born in Palestina, not Palestine, Palestina. And then in Hebrew it says Eretz Israel.
That's interesting.
Says Israel. And I was like, and we're talking about a long time before, 1948. This is my grandfather. And so I'm saying, like, wait a second, my grandfather was born in Palestina, so was my father. This is amazing. So, but I mean, the name was there. I mean, they gave us the name just to punish us. They called it land, Palestina.
The Romans, as you say, renamed the land Palestina to punish the Jews for being too uppity.
Yeah.
But for most of the post-Roman era, it was a reference to an unspecified geographical entity. Some authors, some travelers referred to it as a small strip near Ashkelon.
Right.
And others referred to the general entity there as Palestine. When I was visiting the San Diego Zoo once, there was an animal that was described as being native to Palestine. I don't remember what it was. I was pretty shocked by that, and I wrote to the zoo.
Oh my God.
I wrote to the zoo, and I complained about it, and they said, well, it's just a geographical reference, not a reference to any political entity. And I'm sure they didn't change anything, but that's generally the sense in which it was used. Now, you were told the story about your grandfather's Palestinian document. My stepmother lived on the kibbutz, and I found her old passport. It was a Palestinian passport. So when someone starts giving me the Palestinian line about the oppression of Palestinians, they say, hey, my mother was Palestinian. And that shuts them up for a little while. Not for long, but a little while.
I know. It was like, I was really fascinated too. What fascinated me was that on one side, it said Palestina. On the other side, it says Eretz Israel.
That is interesting.
That's what I found fascinating. And it was like, I don't know, 1990, I don't remember what, but it was like a long time ago. And it was amazing. Okay, Nathan, tell me a little bit about the other article or stories in the book.
Well, let me highlight a few. There's an article, Savage and Jew, a Shared Stereotype, by Howard Schwartz.
That's Savage and Jew? Okay.
This article talks about how when the early explorers arrived in the Americas,
Mm-hmm.
they looked at the Native Americans and saw some of their customs and said, these people are like the Jews. And some of the customs included mikvah, the way they dealt with a dead person, with the body of a dead person. There were many shared rituals, and it's a mitzvah in Christianity, big mitzvah, to bring Jews to Christianity.
Yeah.
The explorers and the evangelists among them said, these people must be descendants of the early Jews because of so many commonalities. And a lot of the stereotypes of Jews and Native Americans as savages, they considered them to be equal. So these evangelists or missionaries thought, if we can convert these Jews, meaning the Native Americans, to Christianity,
Then a mitzvah.
it'll be a tremendous accomplishment.
Okay.
And a lot of them really worked on the subject and did investigation and came to conclusions that these are the same people. Some questions arose when religion was under attack from the rationalists, and some of the Christians started thinking, wait a sec, if these people are Jews and Christianity comes from Judaism, that means we come from these people and we're like these savages. And that was a no-no.
Of course.
They didn't want to degrade themselves like that. So although some of the myth still lives on, there was generally a movement and an abandonment of that concept.
Okay.
Howard Schwartz was an anthropologist, and he did a really groundbreaking book called, don't remember the name of it at the time, but essentially Savage and Jew, where he compared Judaism. He goes into a great deal of detail about shared customs between Native Americans and Jews. So that's one article that I think has really caught my attention, though they're all interesting. Another is the convergence of the Native American and Jewish narratives in our times. It's by Jake Corwin, is a professor of literature in South Africa. He's from Alaska with a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't declare himself to be Jewish, but he feels strongly his connection. And he looks at how the stories are told, casting Native Americans and Jews as the perpetual victim in need of rescue by the righteous Westerner or the righteous white man who knows more and is stronger and can take care of the helpless little people, whether it's by telling them that they should live on their land this way or they don't belong in this land.
Yeah.
We're victims who need guidance from an outsider. It's like the movie Avatar, where it's the human who saves the people, or Dancing with Wolves, where it's the white man who comes and saves the people. So he does a literary analysis of that approach, which is quite fascinating. Another one, which is by Chacham Yossi Fauer, who recently passed away in Israel, a brilliant rabbi, groundbreaking rabbi, who wrote a book, Jews, Conversos, and Native Americans, the Iberian Experience. Chacham Fauer was originally from Argentina, and he does an analysis of the Spanish approach to conquest, to the conquest of the America, as opposed to the British, Dutch, and Central European approach to the conquest. He says that the Spanish approach
was very different.
Was to just
yeah.
loot the land.
Yeah.
You weren't trying to build a nation. You were just trying to go in there, take what you can, and go home. So there was no interest in taming the Indians, in building, in converting the Indians and building them up. There was just an interest in taking what you can from them. And he talked about how the Spanish paid no attention to the lives of Indians and would hang Indians over burning fires, roast them alive in groups of 13 in memory of the Jesus and his disciples, and say that was in the interest of the Native Americans. They were saving their souls. And he tells a story about how it was Spanish policy not to let any Jews into South America, into the Spanish-controlled territories.
Yeah, well, it came from Spain, for God's sake. The Jews were not allowed to live in Barcelona. I think it's still on the books that Jews are not allowed to live in Barcelona. So,
well, there are kosher restaurants there.
Yeah, I'm not surprised,
But the thing is, they didn't even allow conversos. You had to be an old Christian, an old Catholic, to be allowed to go to North America.
Yeah.
In the history of the Spanish conquistadors and their torture and their utter brutality to the Native Americans, there's only a record of one person standing up for the Native Americans and saying, this isn't right. Stop torturing them like that. Let's just leave them alone. And that, of course, was a converso that they didn't know he was a converso. And eventually, he was expelled from the Americas because of his advocacy for Native Americans. Chacham Fauer makes this point. His book is called The Horizontal Society. And he says that the Jewish approach to people you don't know, to the stranger, is love your neighbors as yourself. They may be different, but they're on the same level as yourself. Whereas in other religions, if you weren't a member of that religion, you were inferior and you didn't deserve the rights and you didn't deserve the respect as a human being that members of your religion did.
Wow, David, it's amazing what you did with this book. I urge everyone to read it. It just gives you a different perspective of how to look at things. It's really, I've learned a lot. It's amazing. Wow.
We had a lot of good contributors and original articles, and along with my co-editor, Machla Abramovitz, we're quite proud of this.
It's amazing. So they can actually purchase the book online?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon.
Oh, perfect.
It's published by RVP Press of New York.
Okay.
And it's a collection of articles, and so you can do it at your own pace. And if you want to taste, you can try the online version first.
Yeah, I think it's worth it. I mean, I got hooked just by the title. I thought it was amazing. You did
I
a
would
great.
also encourage
Yeah.
people, the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research has occasional events in Toronto, and they're all interesting. So if you're in Toronto or Montreal, keep an eye out for what we're doing, and you'll learn something and you'll be entertained.
Well, you let me know. You keeping us informed, and we'll let our viewer know. Awesome, you're doing a great job. And I know I'm just going to mention. I know you're working on your own book, but we will. And I want you back on the show to tell us about your book that's coming up. Whenever it comes up, you'll come back on the show and tell us all about it.
Love
You,
that.
Thank you. You're amazing. Thank you very much for joining me. And I hope everybody gets this book and learned a little bit something about our own history as well. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you. And I'm going to tell all my viewers, thank you for joining us. Goodbye, and I'll see you next week.